Our first speaker is Alessandro Longo, who's coming to us remotely, but who will speak to us, and then we do presentation Q&A, so on and so forth. Quick housekeeping notes, couple of drinks over there. We have moss water, some beers, also Diet Coke. Water would be in the kitchen. Bathroom is on the floor below. And that will be all. Alessandro, can you speak to us?
Yeah, can you hear me? Do you hear me? Okay, great. Cool. Should I share my screen? Right. You see my screen, right? Okay, can you just make sounds because I just see my screen and I'm not sure I'm on? But I think I should be.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Sorry, I just see my presentation at the moment and it's a bit weird. Yeah, so I just start. Hi everyone, it's very nice to be part of this Sixposium and very glad to have the space and the opportunity to talk about some of my obsessions. And my name is Alessandro Longo, as said. I'm calling you from Turin, Italy at the moment. And yeah, the title of my presentation is The Drake Era or the Logic of Cultural Fracking. Before going right in, just some quick words about myself and the perspective I come from. As said, I'm a researcher and philosopher based in Berlin. I'm a huge hip hop fan, obsessed. The research topics I'm most interested in are the subversive use of technologies, commons and plural economies, and models of culture distribution, which is relevant with what I'm gonna talk today. Most of my work is channeled through this collective called Reincantamento. You can find our work at that link there. And yeah, this presentation is based on a piece I wrote for my collective newsletter that with the same title of this presentation. And I was prompted to write this piece back in the spring after the infamous rap beef happened between Kendrick and Drake, as we all know. And this was right after, I think, Not Like Us dropped. And I think I want to treat this event beyond just like...
We lost you. 1 second. Let me interrupt.
Yes.
Hear me. I'm just gonna change the output of the audio. Can you start over from your self-presentation?
Yes. From here? Yeah, right?
Yeah.
You hear me right? Okay, cool. Nice. Yeah, so I was saying I'm an Italian but Berlin-based researcher and philosopher. I'm a huge hip hop fan and also Drake fan since a long time. Honestly, my research topics that I'm most interested in are like the subversive use of technologies, commons and plural economies, the models of culture distribution, which is relevant to my perspective on this story today. Most of my work is channeled through this collective called Reincantamento that I helped to found and I help to maintain. We have a website at reincantamento.xyz, and this presentation is based on a piece I wrote for our newsletter back in the spring, right after let's say the end of the beef, or like after Not Like Us dropped, and then Drake dropped it.
Just 1 second. I'm going to try to put you back on the speaker. I think it's connected again. 1 second.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. You can start again.
Okay. Yeah. I'll start from here. Yeah. So I was prompted to write this piece after Not Like Us dropped, and then Drake dropped the songs that we all forget about. But what struck me it was to treat this event as a I think it's a relevant cultural event, and I think the shattering of Drake persona, and we are here asking if this is the end of Drake, it may offer us a good opportunity to look back at what the Drake era was and how it can tell us something not only about the state of hip hop or pop music, but also more general about the cultural climate in which we are all are. And what really specifically like triggered me back then was the sudden, burst of hate that went against Drake, and specifically not from fellow like rappers, the 20v1 thing. Actually, the beef was started, on Metro Booming album and Future record. And not only that, but commentators, fan online, and basically everyone was hating on Drake, all in a way that seems quite sudden. And I don't want to say unexpected because, Drake is the most memed artist, definitely the most memed rapper. But he also seemed like to have reached a point where he was like generally accepted for what he is. And so I want to, my perspective shares something with this image in the slide that comes from an Innuendo Studio video. And so I don't think that the hate towards Drake is just against his character or himself as a singer and rapper, but I think it can tell us something about cultural trends happening in music and in culture, broadly speaking, and generally the logic of cultural production that we are all experiencing in this phase of capitalism. So what was the Drake era? Well, the Drake era was a huge story of success from this Canadian rapper that basically dominated the charts commercially. Nobody ever did it like Drake. This is an undeniable fact. Drake is the most streamed artist of the 2010s. He holds a incredible number of records, like most songs on the charts. Is like factually bigger than the Beatles. And not only that, Drake has always maintained a cultural relevance, obviously. It's not only about numbers. He was accepted even at some point within hip hop circles, or more accepted than what he was at the beginning of his career. I will say, especially after the Meek Mill beef, and after, let's say, Drake won against Meek Mill. And even the 2018 beef with Pusha T, that where Drake instead lost, didn't really seem to affect the general acceptance of Drake as a key figure, if not the number one figure of pop culture and hip hop connected as well. I also want to specify that when I'm saying Drake here and when I'm criticizing Drake, I'm not speaking about the individual Aubrey Graham. I think that Drake is a persona, Drake is a brand. And to borrow an analogy from Matt Dryhurst, Drake is like a Formula One driver, and the car that Drake is driving is made by a collective effort and by a group, teams of professional and often creative professional. And so, yeah, I think Drake, in this sense, Drake as a brand is the embodiment also of a collective agency. And this is what I'm actually speaking about, not just about the individual. Having said that, this huge story of success, at some point, this dominion over pop music started to feel a bit like a tyranny. And I think that in this sense, this verse, that's why every song sounds like Drake featuring Drake, kind of turned to be more true than expected, especially in the second half of the 2010s. And Drake, I think this image, Drake started to feeling like a behemoth of pop music and like a too big to fail kind of guy. Also, extremely like connected to the power of major labels. And it's known that Drake has apparently a good relationship with the CEO of Universal Music Records. And generally, Drake presence started to feel a bit oppressive in a certain sense. And I think this image is encapsulating this feeling. This is the Spotify homepage after Drake released the Scorpion, his 2018 album. And it kind of got viral for his absolutely shameless way of promotion. And Drake was on the cover of every single playlist, including the ambient playlist, which I've still found to be very funny. And at the same time, Drake, I think, especially in the second phase of his career, his music, his way of operating started to adapt and actually became a sort of perfect template, in my opinion, of the emerging streaming economy and the fact that streaming platforms became the main channel for listening to music, accessing music, and also releasing music. And I think it's interesting that the record that came before Scorpion, that is More Life in 2017, was defined as a playlist. And to my knowledge, this is the first, or one of the first for sure, major record from a pop artist to be called as such. And the playlist is, of course, the template of streaming services. It's the form where music is mostly distributed and consumed in streaming platforms. And it's interesting to see this shift from an album to a playlist, because an album must be somehow cohesive, even just sonically, while a playlist can offer, let's say, a little bit of everything. And you can have, for example, like a tropical song, you can have a sad song, you can have a more straight banger, you can have all of these, and it doesn't have to be cohesive because it's already presented as a playlist. And I think that a listener in this case can approach it precisely as they do with Spotify playlists. They can just cherry pick some of the tracks they like most and forget about everything else, because there is nothing cohesive holding that together. And I think that Drake records after More Life, my feeling is that they all started to reproduce this template, and they also became quite longer as well in a certain aspect. And I think this is also something that was then mimicked by other pop artists and generally big rappers as well, based just on the fact that the more you stream, the more revenues you get, and the more the more certification, because then at some point, of course, the emergence of the streaming economy forced Billboard and all these like chart systems to like certify also streamings as sales. And then Drake was receiving more and more platinum plaques. He holds the record also for that, and was like in a loop of like fueling his mythology as the best-selling artist ever. Of course, again, Drake maintained this cultural relevance. It was not only a commercial success, otherwise it would be way much boring than what he actually is. And Drake did that. I think particularly, he always managed through these, like, let's say almost 15 years, to keep his sound somehow interesting, to connect with new artists and emerging artists. And he perfectionized this formula to the point that we can even call it a strategic move, that is the Drake feature. So the Drake feature, as we all know, is like Drake co-signing an emerging artist, usually from a local scene that is kind of going viral in a local city, and then hopping on a song with this artist and kind of putting the spotlight on the feature, but at the same time connecting his brand and this persona to this new sound that is just emerging. The first time Drake did this was probably with The Weeknd in 2011, inspiring his whole Take Care sound around the sound of a, at the time, unknown R&B singer from Toronto, if I'm not wrong. And then this double bind, if we can call it like that, it means that sometimes the Drake presence actually overshadows the presence of the artist that's being co-signed. And there are many like stories of this kind. There is I Love McConnell, for instance, Block Boy JB, and then Drum, which I think is the most relevant one and also sadly forgotten, because just the fact Drum released his hit that was going viral that summer, Cha-Cha, and then Drake remixed Cha-Cha, and then that Cha-Cha remix was released then as Hotline Bling. That is probably the most famous song from Drake. And so it's funny and interesting, I think, to see how this attitude allowed Drake to maintain cultural relevance for all this time. And then I like to, and this connects with the title of my presentation, I like to connect this behavior and like that this tactic of Drake as a brand, as a persona, with the idea of cultural fracking. That is an idea, I think, firstly developed by cultural critic Jay Springett. And cultural fracking is born when multinational corporate conglomerates like Disney, Universal Music Records, Sony, and so on have secure intellectual property rights over the stories and the cultural phenomena we all love. They capitalize in a way on the feelings we have for these stories, for this culture, by producing an endless amount of commodities and products based on these IPs. Similar to actual fracking in this sense, cultural fracking is an extractive operation that ignores the negative externalities it produces. It ignores, for example, the feeling that we have of being surrounded by an endless cycle of references, formulas, reboot, recurring characters, remakes, and so on and so forth. Something that can be someone called retromania at some point, but it's not only retro, it's just this, I will say, this occupation of collective attention with some big brands that we are forced to like, and brands that become bigger and bigger, including way more details and characters and stories and all of that. Obviously, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a good example of this, for instance. What does this to do with Drake? Well, Drake, in my view, the Drake era is the sort of perfect iteration of cultural fracking within pop music and particularly within hip hop. Because at some point, I believe that Drake basically started to act as a gateway for Universal Music Record to be able to frack many of the possible emerging sound that were popping in North America and beyond North America. And again, Drake, the individual, has probably a genuine interest for some of these sounds and cultures, grime, dancehall, name it. But as an operation within and in the logic of cultural production and distribution, with his cosign, Drake has not only signaled his respect for an artist or a style, but also the interest of the industry for this potential novelty coming in the market. So Drake sort of became an index for market potential. And this works so well that the Drake era also originated a template to be reproduced. And this is, for example, is noticed by FD Signifier, who's an amazing YouTube, let's say, music critic. And then he called, like, he defines also mention other main artists of our time, like Bad Bunny. Bad Bunny can be considered the Latino Drake. Jack Harlow, the white Drake. Travis Scott, I will call him the gamers Drake or the trap Drake, and so on. So you have these like very big stars suited for many different styles, releasing long records with a lot of different subgenre in it, a lot of potential styles, and also keep connecting with emerging artists. This is the way probably pop stars always operated in a way, but I think it's the novelty Drake represented that it brings this thing also within hip hop. And so I think that Drake, as a cultural production and distribution blueprint, offers the perfect formula for the streaming era. It is in the end reproducible, adaptable, and it can be fine-tuned for a specific niche. Is music to be offered from algorithms and maybe in the future by algorithms themselves? And this is, we know that like in the past spring, I think before the beef, fake Drake and the Weeknd song went viral, and it was made through let's say generative tools with machine learning algorithms. And so we can imagine a future where AI becomes a tool for like acting cultural fracking as a service, we can say, and basically sucking up like data points and granules of recent cultural trends and production and regurgitating them into a commodifiable form. So probably in a future, let's say, big media conglomerates will not even need to look for an artist good enough to be like the next Drake, quote unquote, but also they could simply train a model and generate how many endless Drake as possible. So this sounds a bit like a green future, but I think that also what the end of the Drake era, if we can call it like this, signifies is also a feeling of tiredness, probably, and this is what I felt, for this hyper-extractive, relentlessly cynical approach to culture that dominated the mainstream, I think, in the past decade. And despite a very powerful marketing apparatus, very powerful, occupation of collective attention, cultural fracking cannot go on forever. And this feud can represent, in this sense, the first moment where maybe we collectively understand what these dynamics are and start to pay attention to the many interesting phenomena that are instead happening in music and culture, and we stop to look only at the Drakes of our time and start to actually look for decentralized and autonomous and really creative and free exercise of creativity and art. And this is my wish. I wish to, this is my wish and the way I wish to end this presentation for today. Thank you very much. And yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask a few questions now. Let me know if you can hear me.
Yes, yes, I can.
Hearing your presentation, I'm reminded of the now late philosopher Frederick Jameson, who passed this year. Adapting his famous phrase, I think now, it is easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of Drake. To go back to like the theme of this conversation, I think there's a definite desire in the presentation for something besides cultural fracking. How do you reconcile the success that's still happening now of this cultural fracking phenomenon, and potentially people in this room want alternatives, they want something else? Have you seen any sort of trends or things emerge that give you hope for something after after Drake? It's like the Drake realism, if you want to use the Mark Fisher term.
Well, that's I mean, within music, I think there's a lot happening. I think what could help, let's say, overcome the Drake realism in a way is probably also developing, and I think this is happening in many aspects, but like also systems of more collective curation and spotlighting interesting artists and scenes that are emerging. And I think it's also a bit of an issue of attention and the platforms through which we listen and discover music, for example. I don't know, an example I can give you. I mean, since you are in New York, I think Surf Gang was something very interesting. I don't know if it's beyond dynamics of cultural fracking, but like it's a little niche thing that and sound that emerged in hip hop that I found to be interesting. Overall, I don't know. I think baile funk it's very cool and like it's going in very interesting and crazy direction. Music from Brazil, for example, a lot of like I'm very into this merging of like Latino sounds with contemporary electronic music that is happening on many fronts. So I think that's actually very cool. But it's beyond the sounds and uh, sounds and music and culture is actually for me more the models of distribution and reception that we through which we interact with these cultural artifacts, you know. So I think we also need to build and to have different tools at our disposal. I think something like that. I mean, I think Drake is very coherent with the logic of Spotify. So after Drake, we need also an after Spotify, in a way.
Yeah, this is very interesting because this last sort of idea makes it sound almost like Drake is very much the result of technology in a sense, right? Of the streaming era. So maybe the Drake era is, in other words, the streaming era. I'm the thing with fracking, and like as an analogy, I think is very interesting, is that it seems, at least in the realm of like energy and oil, there's always somewhere else to go. And in many ways, it does seem like we may come to a point where we extinguish sort of the cultural resources, specifically if we don't allow Dram and I Love McConan to actually become big celebrities and sort of foster their own
Yeah.
communities. What sort of circular cultural economies have you maybe seen or you think of when you think about the co-opting or the extraction? Have you seen other models of like maybe cultural commensalism or mutualism that'd be good to bring here as examples?
It's another question, but I mean, I like this what you said, that is the resources are running out at some point, you know. So that's why I also think that, for instance, the fact that Tyler is releasing an album on Monday, you know, and the fact that even some of these Kendrick songs got released on Instagram first. I mean, I don't know exactly what's going on, but I heard there are theories on TikTok probably that are suggesting that these are like first experiments to not move only according to platform like logics of releasing music, you know, so also changing the date. And then regarding more circular, I think it's a great point, you know, is that I mean, my feeling in the past few years, this year has been incredibly entertaining in hip hop because of all of this and other events. But I think the last few years have been really stalling, you know. And I think it's also because, I mean, there have been tragic losses as well of very good artists, you know. But at the same time, I think in a way, this tyranny of Drake didn't allow new stars to emerge so easily. And so I think that, for example, something that emerged, and I don't know if it's regenerative, but in a way it seems like an healthy development, for example, is Griselda. I think their story is like a good story. I like them. I'm not a big fan, for example, but just as an example, I think they are sounds like a genuine story, you know, and something that is not going following the trend, but is an organic process of growth, but also just establish a new sound and new artist and a scene, a small scene interconnecting artists. Yeah, so I would say this as an example to stay in hip hop lane.
Yeah. Any questions from the crowd? All right. Alessandro, thank you so much for calling
Thank
in
you very
from
much.
Italy. I know it must be a little late over there, so
Thank
we
you very
really
much.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Likewise, thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure. Have a great rest of the symposium. I'm gonna catch asynchronously. Also, just saying I'm in New York next week, actually. So from the 3rd, the 4th. So somebody wanna hang out, you have my email, I think. Would be great to meet you in person. And bye-bye. Have a great rest of the day.
Amazing.
Lovely. Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.